How are you this morning?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you, Dylan?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to having this conversation. Cool. So for those who don't know Raymond, I guess Raymond, you're as close to the rock star as it gets in the IP world. You're a former Fortune 500 executive. You were the VP of intellectual property, as well as a CEO. You've written 3 bestsellers, including the Billionaire IP Strategy, which I've seen featured in a list of the kind of go-to books for venture capitalists, kind of getting up to speed on the space. And now I guess you're a speaker and really a coach to CEOs. So in the several hats that you're wearing, one of the things that you're doing is advising CEOs and CFOs of high growth, ready tech and life science companies on how to become more investable and how to prepare for exits. So I thought that's obviously something that's that we think a lot about and write about, and thought as a point of departure you might talk a little bit about that and what that entails and what your practice really revolves around.
Yes, as you know, the world of IP strategy is fascinating, and the world of innovation, the broader world of innovation, is also very interesting. My primary focus is with CEOs of the growth stage companies and helping them to get ready for a further financing round or to prepare for an exit.
Yeah, and that's typically kind of a multi-month or an ongoing relationship, or what does it actually look like in practice? It's being on hand, kind of to field thoughts or to a program, or how do you actually carry that out?
Yeah, just like there's no standard model of innovation, there's
Yeah.
no two engagements that end up being exactly the same.
Okay.
Typically, though, it does involve several months of working together to get systems in place, to get processes in place, and just generally build the IP culture in a company.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet it's an interesting thing. We hear it's over and over and over again, and you actually see it in some of the big surveys, for example, that Deloitte carried out, that IP kind of slips between both at a law firm, but also kind of like large companies in between departments. So at law firms, we hear that the financing partners think that IP's got nothing to do with them. The IP partners think financing has got nothing to do with them. Within a big company, IP often fits into the GC's kind of domain, but then really the assets are often being kind of like built and the value created in, for example, the CTO's office. So nobody really knows this space, and I think nobody owns the space, I should say. And to the extent you can get a culture revolving around that, I think you've got a pretty big advantage, don't you?
Yes, and that's why I can carefully avoid getting stuck in those divisions and those definitions, because I don't work with the CTO's office. I don't work for the lawyer's office. I work exclusively for the CEOs and CFOs, because what I'm talking about is funding. And a big part of funding these days is due diligence. And due diligence traditionally used to be financial due diligence or legal due diligence. But these days it covers a whole lot more. And because the value of the company is typically more than 90% intangible, the IP due diligence is now a very, very serious stumbling block for a lot of companies.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my days as an M&A banker, IP was on the checklist, but it was like section 14, probably after leases and properties, and that part of the diligence was typically carried out by an associate at the law firm. They kind of put some files on a VDR somewhere, some other associate perhaps on the other side of the transaction ticked it off, and that was it. So as you said, that's not the case anymore. IP is now, and intangible assets now, kind of like 90% of the value of the company, as you said. But when I was doing M&A, not all that long ago at all, it was probably 75% or 80% or something like that. So less, but still very important and really, pretty close. What is it that you think changed that actually made it more focus?
Yes, you're correct that it very often was just a check the box activity. One thing is that a lot of the people who were performing the due diligence didn't know the questions to ask. Another thing that you found is, if we even go back as recently as 2020, 2021, when there was massive fear of missing out on investment opportunities. There was a huge frenzy in the investment world, and companies were afraid that if they don't invest in this company, somebody else is going to get in there before them.
Yeah.
So it was all about velocity and getting the deals done very quickly. Things have changed totally now in the investment world. And we had a major halt on investment activity for a number of years. Now investors are back in the market because they know they need to deploy their investments to get returns. So they're back in the market, but they're much more careful and they've much more choice. So their questions they're asking are much more probing. And the difficulty is with due diligence, that if you go into due diligence and this is the first time that you're encountering these questions and you don't have an answer, the investors aren't going to wait around for you to fix it and then come back again. They just move on to the next one because they have so many options available to them.
That's interesting. And I guess a few years back when you had zero interest rates and ZERP and everything was growth and money was almost free, it was really just chasing top line revenue. And in a world now where you've actually got to be profitable, how do you get profitable? You've got to exploit these assets that you have and the competitive advantage that you have. So it makes total sense that investors would have shifted that focus to how many users you've got and your go-to-markets and your motions, PLG, and so on, to actually deeply understanding your economics and the assets. So that's what informs the DD now. Yeah. Okay.
And if you think of how a lot of these VCs were formed, it was people who studied in business school back in the 1980s or back in the 1990s. And at that time, competitive advantage and sustainable competitive advantage were the buzzwords.
Yeah.
What they've come around to a realization is that if 90% of your business is intangible and 90% of your risks are invisible, that sustainable competitive advantage is all around the IP strategy. So that's the reason why now there's a sudden awareness of this, and people are scrambling to be able to, first of all, ask the right questions, and then on the other side, to be ready to have the right answers. And that's a lot of the work that we do with clients, is that we will go in and we will do a dry run due diligence. In other words, we will very quickly run a ruler over their business and identify the kinds of questions that we think could pop up when they get into those investment discussions.
Okay.
And then we fix the business so that they can eliminate those problems. But also while they're doing that, they learn a new language so that they can speak very convincingly to the people who are bringing up those awkward questions.
Yes. Okay, cool. So preparation is kind of the key part of the process. So it's actually an asset, like what are the areas? So if we had to think of a capital raise, Intanify is getting ready to do our next fundraise in Q1 next year. So we're actually kind of going through this process ourselves, and as we said, dog fooding our own product. So there's a preparation phase. If you had to think through, or if you had to describe how you help your clients go through that full thing through closing, without getting in the weeds, the kind of major areas would be, as you said, prep. What else?
Well, as you know, innovation isn't a one-size-fits-all activity. So it's very hard to give a prescription that works for every single situation. Some of the things that we do is that we go in and we will look at a company and we will look at, do they have internal assets existing that are hidden in the business that even the owners didn't recognize were interesting assets in the business? So we look at things like trade secrets. We look at patentable subject matter that perhaps hasn't been picked up, or some of the patent prosecution that they've done that may be amenable to further massaging as we move along. We look at, for example, do they have any catchy trademarks, so catchy brands, catchy slogans they might have that could be better protected by trademarks. We look on the other side as well, that are there unnecessary costs there? Have they filed patents that are not relevant to them? Have they, technology that's become obsolete and there's no sense in protecting that anymore? The same with trademarks. Have the trademarks kept up with modern trends as well? So we look at all of those things with regard to assets they have and to do things in the most cost-effective way. And then the other side then is looking at IP risks. Because if you bring in a round of funding, you become a new type of company. And you will be exposed to a whole lot of different kinds of risks. And you want to be able to show that you have a good understanding what those risks are. and that you have mitigation procedures in place to be able to handle any of those potential risks.
Yeah, interesting. I want to dig into the risks. Before that, finding the assets that the company has, I'd be interested in what you see, but we see that it's said that owners find things they didn't know they had. In our experience, that's 100% of the time. It might not be everything, but there always seems to be quite a lot of surprise. It might almost be a subconscious awareness that more or less such things might exist. Couldn't describe them accurately, but going through an audit, there's almost always at least a good percentage, 30% up, that are actually distinct surprises to companies and management. Do you find the same, or?
All the time.
Yeah.
Especially if a company has been doing things very correctly. And the problem with doing things very correctly is it's based on the vision of whoever was laying out what the rules are.
Yeah.
So very often technology-driven companies are advised by patent attorneys, which is wonderful for the patent part of it.
Yeah.
But the patent attorneys don't get to see past that to things like trade secrets and trademarks and copyright and maybe open source software problems. So they are very good on the patent strategy.
Yeah.
But they may miss out on the other assets that are in the company or how to integrate those with the patent strategy.
Yeah.
Because the difficulty is that if you rely on patents as your only form of strategy, and if you come across a competitor who's got the ability to undermine your patents, your whole business can collapse.
Yeah.
So what you want to have is your patents, your trademarks, your copyrights, your trade secrets, and other forms of IP, and have all of them working in concert so that even if somebody does knock the patent pillar, that you still have the rest to be able to support the whole business and you have a stable business strategy continuing.
Yeah, I saw an incredible number that it's 75% of patents fall over under challenge in the US. So even if you've got the patent, there's a 3 out of 4 chance that if you come to need it, you can't really rely on it actually kind of standing up in court, on past prior arts and those types of things. Cool, that's interesting. So on the risks, obviously the other side's value is risk. So I think without looking at that, you're really missing kind of half the point. What do you see, companies get most wrong? Or maybe banana skins, but, all the way up to kind of red flags, generally.
Right. Well, I don't deal very much with startups and I deal more with scale-ups. But one thing that I hear startups saying all the time is that, that I'm dealing with so many problems now, I can't wait until I'm successful and then all my problems will be gone.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that when they get to the level that they think is success, they're going to encounter a whole new world of problems that they have no idea how to deal with them.
Yeah.
Because when you're a startup, you don't have any resources. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares about you. You're not a threat to anybody.
Yeah.
So it means that you're not going to get anybody to sue you because you don't have any assets to come after.
Mm.
But if you bring in investment and you've got a big pot of money, you now have a target on your back.
Yeah.
And that could be disgruntled former employees. It could be jealous competitors. It could be opportunists such as patent trolls.
Yeah.
But it could also be some of the more established companies. Companies like Microsoft and Pfizer spend billions in research and development every year. And they invent a lot of things that are not even in their core business. But they may have patents in areas that could be impinging on the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, when you're a startup, they'll give you a free pass. But
Yeah.
when you bring in, 10, 20, $30 million worth of funding, they'll say, okay, now you're a serious business or you're starting to be a serious business. And we think you should pay your fair share for some of the things that we've invented.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies come to that stage and they haven't put money aside to be able to handle those kinds of problems.
Yeah.
So to be able to, first of all, identify that those potential risks are risks that will come with success.
Yeah.
And then when those risks do come, what do you do about it?
Mm.
And that's even in the benign situation. In the situation where you're going to be even more successful, people talk about disruptive innovation. If you are truly disruptive, it means you're going to be disturbing somebody.
Yeah.
And if you disturb some of the big incumbents, you need to be ready for how they're going to respond. And when they do respond, what do you have in reserve to be able to deal with that as well?
Yeah.
And I could tell you loads of stories about that, but I know we've a short bit of time today.
Oh, no, some more stories always good. So the mistake there is being a young company, not preparing yourself for those things. So, for example, doing freedom to operate, and making filings earlier, thinking that you can sort it out later, but by the time you get there later, it's potentially too late. That would be the mistake, but
It would be, but again, I get very nervous anytime I hear a startup talking about freedom to operate. I get nervous that they may have been advised by a lawyer who loves doing freedoms to operate,
yeah,
because you can get huge fees for doing freedom to operate studies, and they may not
yeah.
be useful or maybe not be appropriate or the best use of the resources that the company has at the time.
So if you're a startup and you're resource constrained, I mean, I think even paying 10 grand for freedom to operate is probably a pretty big investment. Then what would be better advice?
Well, with startups, again, very often they'll say, yeah, I know that IP is important, but I've got 100 other things that I need to do. I need to pay for the electricity. I need to pay for
Yeah.
stationery. I need to pay for developers, and if I'm going to spend, 20,000 on IP strategy, or I'm going to spend 20,000 on developers, I think I'll pay for the developers now and I'll handle the IP strategy later.
Yeah, yeah,
And I know it's going to be more expensive later, but I'll do it
yeah,
later.
yeah.
That was the pre-2020 thinking.
Mm,
But these days, the I'll fix it after I get funding has
yeah,
now changed to, if you don't fix it, you're not going to get funding,
yeah,
because the companies are only investing in investment targets that are in good shape.
yeah.
No longer are they just looking at the rapid growth and an idea and founders we all love. They're looking for a well-managed business. And a big
Yeah,
part of the well-managed business is they have their IP strategy under control, especially if their intangibles are more than 90% of the value of the company.
yeah, yeah. Or at least it's a way to communicate if a VC is looking at, I mean, we know the numbers that they look at like 4,000x, probably do close to DD on 50 companies and probably invest in 4. If you are in that 50 and your house is in order and you're able to communicate that well, you might just kind of come through and get more access to capital because you've done that correctly. So, that would be a reason to kind of do this properly. A cynic might say that's all signaling and it's window dressing. Now, how would you respond to that? Because it's easy to level that kind of an accusation.
Every time somebody goes for a pitch session, it's signaling. Of course, it's signaling.
Yeah,
So being able to show that you have thought about the value of your business and the risks the business faces, and
yeah,
also that you've thought about that we're at this stage now when we bring in funding. For example, a lot of companies I'm talking to, they're maybe at Series B, they've come through Series A, they've got to Series B, they're now going for Series C funding.
yeah,
Just because you got through Series A and Series B doesn't mean that you're going to automatically get through to Series C, because the questions are going to be different.
yeah,
It's like a Super Mario game that you beat all the monsters on level 1. So you advance to level 2. You advance to level 3. When you get to level 4, the skills that you had in level 1 no longer apply. You need to have
yeah,
different skills, you need to have different weapons, you're meeting different monsters, and you need to be
yeah,
able to get through that level.
yeah,
And that's what the investors are looking at. They're not
yeah,
looking at, oh, we're putting money in this, we'll see how it goes and we'll see what it returns. No, they're saying, this is the company that we're deciding to put our money in. We want
yeah,
to know what kind of company they're going to become after we put the money in. So you
yeah,
do want to send very strong signals as
yeah,
to what kind of company you're going to become, that you've thought about this, that you have
yeah,
everything organized. You may not have everything in place right now, but you definitely have organized what's going to happen and
yeah.
where those funds are going to be put to use.
Yeah, yeah. So another way to put that, if I got it correctly, is signaling might be a slide at the back of your presentation with a 2x2 matrix with some IP kind of in it. That might be signaling. Sincere signaling, if we could call it that, which is actually credible to an investor, is a far more coherent story, which is also a story that progresses as your company progresses, and you're now dealing with different things. As you say, when you're bigger and more successful, you would need to signal more preparation in different ways, and probably other things like having IP insurance, having budgets for kind of challenges and so on. So, okay, that's good. What other kind of like big risks have you seen? You said you've seen loads of things go wrong. Any war stories of big kind of banana skins?
Well, some of the things I see as well is that a lot of people who are involved in high-tech business, especially software-driven high-tech businesses,
Yeah.
may have an anti-patent religion almost.
Mm.
And even if they don't have an anti-patent religion, they may just think that patents don't apply to what we do.
Yeah.
We're innovating really quickly. It's going to take us 9 months to get this product to the market. The product's only going to have 9 months on the market, and then it's gone. That's 18 months. It could take us 4 years to get a patent, so patents aren't relevant to us. So that's how the thinking goes. What they don't realize, though, is that there are thousands of other people who have patents on the thing that you might be trying to do.
Yeah.
So patents are relevant, but not your
Yeah.
patents, their patents.
Yes.
So you need to be able to be very clear that this is the direction I'm going, and these are the risks that I can see in that direction.
Yeah, interesting. Anybody who's building a business that only thinks it's going to have 9 months of life is probably in a bit of a trouble before they've started. Cool. All right. Well, look, you're an expert. We're a technology business. In this kind of day of looking at like man plus machine and of having an AI kind of colleague, how do you think man plus machine in our case, for example, can work best?
It's a very rapidly evolving area.
Yeah.
The machines are very good at automating the repetitive and mundane tasks. There's huge efficiency gains to be gained from the application of AI, and especially the smart application of AI in combination with humans. In the world of innovation, because every single situation is different, it's very difficult to get a replicable model. So AI is not so good at handling the outliers that you want your company to be.
Yes.
So it still does require that kind of pattern recognition that the humans are really good at, and that the AI hasn't really got to yet. From that kind of proof, because the number of patterns that are being shown to the AI are too limited to train those hungry models.
That's really interesting framing, actually. That's almost nails it. That if you want to innovate, you specifically can't be in the pattern, right? Because if you were in the pattern, then you wouldn't be innovating. Therefore, have the patterns available to understand things, to give context, to spot risks. But then you will always need that expert judgment to be able to tell, what that extra kind of juice was. Interesting. Okay, cool. I really like that, actually. Kind of frames our business a little bit, to be honest. Cool. So yeah, in closing, I got a couple questions that I often ask. So, what do you think that most people think about IP or think they understand about IP that you think is dangerously wrong?
What's dangerously wrong is that people think that lawyers all understand about IP. So if you look at any law school syllabus, you will see that they study constitutional law, they study contract law, they study maritime law, they study marriage law. You can go the whole way through a Harvard law degree and not study a module on IP.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the Harvard modules that you've got, first year is very general subjects. When you get from second and after that, you have 7 different paths that you can go on. And only one of them is the technology path. And only in that technology path do you have IP. And within the IP, then you got patents, you got trademarks, you got trade secrets, you got separate modules again on those.
Yeah.
So you can have somebody who's got a Harvard law degree and doesn't know anything significantly about IP.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two is, and again, this is not knocking the lawyers, because the good lawyers are worth their weight in gold. But number two is that if you do bring in a lawyer, they're really good insofar as they are in that area of expertise. But if you're looking for an overall all-encompassing IP strategy, they may not be as good at the things on the edges of that, because that's not their area. And it's wrong to ask them to be giving opinions on that area. So you will get very correct advice, but it'll be insufficient, and it could put your whole business at risk.
Yeah, interesting. We have an advisor that asked me I've studied business like undergraduate, and then I did an MBA. And he said, how many IP courses did you do? And similarly, like nothing, which is crazy if you think about that. That's 90% of the value of companies, right? You go through a whole MBA, learn all kinds of stuff. Queuing theory in production lines and so on, but nothing about IP. I mean, it's crazy, really.
Right.
So, and lawyers, you almost if you're making an uneducated guess, it might be safer to assume a lawyer knows something, because anybody on the street kind of arguably knows even less. But people just need to inform themselves a bit more to make that decision. Cool.
Yes.
So, and what do you think that most people don't know about IP and intangible assets that they should?
Well, the main one is that they already have a lot of value in their company that they may not understand very well. So the fact that you've unrecognized assets in your company can be a very exciting thing to discover. Another thing is that IP is really interesting in that you can have multiple uses for the same asset. So I've developed a list of 55 different ways that you can use patents. But if I go to a conference and I ask all the CEOs to put their hands up and ask, do you know the functions of a patent? And they'll all put their hands up, and nearly all will say protection. But they don't realize that there are all these other functions. And I'm not saying you need to do all 55 functions, but let's say that you did 5 of them or 10 of them. That would be 10 times as high a level of utilization of your assets than you currently are doing. So you can utilize your assets 10 times more. So if we start off with uncovering hidden assets, and then we get multiple uses of the same assets, you can see the upside benefits of just doing that work, even before you start investing in generating more assets.
Yeah, interesting.
And then that's all separate from the whole story about risk that I was talking about.
Yeah, interesting. And if you think that it's just for protection, and then in one particular case, the patent is not needed for the protection, but it could have been used to block a competitor, to raise financing, any of the other 55 things that I imagine on your list, all of those have just not been used at all. So that is quite a misapprehension. Cool. And looking forward, I think quite a forward thinker in this space, getting your crystal ball out. Do you see any kind of trends or anything transpiring generally in this space?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've seen coming out in the last few years has been the emergence of IP due diligence. And it's something that, again, you mentioned business schools. It's not taught in business schools. I was talking to a friend of mine who's had 2 exits. And I was asking him, well, did you have any problems with due diligence? He says, oh my God, Raymond, this is the one thing they don't teach you. So due diligence in IP is where deals are going to die right now.
Yeah.
And this is a serious problem, and most people don't know about it until it's too late.
Yeah. Well, good for us, I guess. So for people listening to you and thinking I'm planning a fundraising for next year, or I'm planning to exit by Q4 next year, how could they work with you and get in touch with you to benefit from that?
At the moment, there isn't much availability to work with me, but certainly they can connect with me on LinkedIn. So if you probably have my details at the end of this as well. So if they connect me with LinkedIn, or they can find something very simple on raymondhegarty.com.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then they can get in the queue, I guess.
Yeah, cool. And there isn't even a queue. Like if they connect me on LinkedIn, they'll get stuff for free from me anyway. So that's it's a community where we can share information at low cost to people.
Cool. Excellent. Well, Raymond, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again for the opportunity. And we look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully working with you when you're ready for bigger things.
Thank you, and keep up the good work. You're doing a lot to get the word out there. So I applaud you for that. And also good luck in building your business.